Hi, everyone. It's good to see you. Let me introduce myself. My name is Mary Smith. I'm so glad that you're taking the time to be with me tonight. I am very excited to share this information with you. And tonight, I'm going to start with that basic modern definition and understanding of ADHD. And if you're a chaos free family member, some of this information is going to be a refresher to you. And for those of you who are new to chaos free, I hope that you hear things that you have never heard before or that you hear them explained in a way that's new to you. I thought that ADHD Awareness Month might be a good time to answer some of those more frequent why questions that I get from parents. So, just a little bit about me. I have been an ADHD life skills coach and parent educator since 2011. I specialize in working with parents and children 16 and under with executive functions caused by ADHD, autism, or any other kind of developmental disorder. I do this through education and in a collaborative environment, and that means when possible, we have the parent and child in the same session working together. I'm the creator of the Chaos Free Family and Chaos Free Homework programs. My practice focuses on helping parents develop more patience and empathy for their child through a better understanding of ADHD as that developmental condition. And I help them build collaborative relationships. And to do this, I teach a systems approach to generating more successful outcomes for the child versus trying to create that behavioral change through failure, punishment, and discipline. So, for first time attendees to a chaos free event, welcome. I hope this serves to increase your knowledge and broaden your perspective of ADHD. And to those old friends here, thank you so much for coming back. It is really great to see you. So, I appreciate it. So, let's start with a little story. I grew up on the desert plains out in Midland, Texas. And out that way, there is a state park called the Monahans Sandhills. And one summer, my parents took all of us kids, there's five of us, to spend the day there. Now, for people who have never lived in the desert, this might look like a wretched place, okay? But we absolutely loved it. We would beg teachers to take our field trips there. We would beg our parents to sign us up for YMCA summer camp because the end of summer trip was always to the sand hills. And you might ask, why do you want to go walk around the big sand dune in 100-degree heat? Well, we wanted to go for a lot of reasons. There were trails. We could chase horny toads and lizards. We could find scorpions. We could see all different plants that we couldn't see in town. But the real reason why we wanted to go was to slide on that sand, right? It was like flying. So that summer day when we got there, mom and dad set up our base camp at these picnic tables because that's the only place that there's shade. There's no trees in the sandhills. So us kids, as soon as everything was kind of out of the car, we disappeared over this hill that you see right behind the picnic tables. Now that picture is taken from far away, so that hill looks pretty small, but that hill in itself is probably about 3 stories taller. So what us kids would do would be go up that hill, go down the other side, and then go on to bigger hills. And somewhere around the middle of the day, my oldest brother would give the word, and we'd all head back to mom and dad for lunch. And so when we topped the hill and we arrived back at these picnic tables in the shade, there were one or two bees kind of buzzing around us, right? And of course, none of us kids wanted the bees around, so we started complaining. And my parents said, look, it's just a couple of bees. They're not hurting anyone. Just go ahead and eat, mind your business, and we'll be fine. So we did, right? We started eating and we were fine until we opened our Cokes. And when we did that, immediately there were way more bees landing on our sandwiches, on our chips. and especially on the top of our Coke cans. Now, some of us were scared, some were annoyed, some were outright angry about this situation, but everyone sat at that picnic table resigned to just endure the bees. Then my sister went to take a drink of her Coke, and a bee that had gone inside the can flew out and stung her on the lip. Well, as you can imagine, mayhem ensued. There was crying and shouting, and some of us even blamed my sister for not shooing that bee away before taking a drink. But my dad, he paused. He kind of stepped back a little bit and he realized, hey, these bees, they're only attracted to these sugary Cokes. So my dad grabbed a Coke, walked about 20 yards away from the picnic table, opened the Coke, poured it on the sand, and then left that can in the sand far away from us. Now, little by little, the bees started going to that can instead of having to deal with us waving and swatting them around. And within 2 to 3 minutes, we were all enjoying our picnic again. These bees were not aggressive, or else they would have been stinging all of us, right? They were just trying to get to the sugar because that's what bees do in order to reach their goal of providing for the hive. So if my dad had not taken the time to understand the truth behind the bees' behavior, he would not have been able to give the bees what they needed and to help his family at the same time. So whether it's a bee or whether it's ADHD, understanding the truth about behavior matters. So attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD. It's a neurodevelopmental disorder that interferes with functioning and development, and it's marked by persistent symptoms of inattention, hyperactivity, and impulsivity. If you look it up, that's the definition that you're going to find. If you take anything away from tonight, I want you to learn that ADHD is the worst name that describes this condition, because ADHD people to pay attention. It's just that they struggle to pay attention to the most important thing in the moment. Not everyone with ADHD is physically hyperactive. And finally, because ADHD includes so many more challenges than this overly simplistic definition can describe. So here are the people that if you think you or a loved one has ADHD, that you can go to that can evaluate and diagnose ADHD. And while these people know how to do it and are allowed to do it, I would make sure that you're going to someone who is trained and has a lot of experience doing these evaluations. You can also get an evaluation through the school system, but the formal diagnosis must still come from a medical professional. So what happens when you go to the school? They do the evaluation, they tally up all the scores, and then they hand it to you and say, hey, it looks kind of like, but you need to go to a doctor to get the formal diagnosis. So if we're going to talk about a disorder that impacts the development of the brain, we need to know a little bit about how the brain works so we can appreciate the differences between the ADHD brain and a neurotypical brain. So the brain has many specialized structures within it. Think about the organs in your body and how each of them have special functions to perform. The heart pumps blood throughout the body. The kidneys filter toxins from the blood. Well, the brain is the same. And these different areas of specialization in the brain exchange signals and information through a network of nerve cells called neurons. Now, some of these signals are responsible for shaping our behavior and our performance. An interesting fact about these neurons is that they don't actually touch each other. They're separated by a space called the synaptic gap. And since they don't touch each other, they require these special hormones called a neurotransmitter, shown here is the red dots, to relay this information across that gap. Now, the neurotransmitters that are associated with ADHD and its symptoms are dopamine, norepinephrine, and serotonin. Now, the diagram in this red frame illustrates the pathways through which each of these neurotransmitters pass their signals and information to the different areas of the brain. And I want you to note how all three of these transmitters connect all of those areas of specialization in the diagram above. Now, there's a special set of processes that happen in our brain called the executive functions. They originate right here behind our forehead, right in the prefrontal cortex of the brain, and they influence every part of our day-to-day living, like performing at school or at work, completing our chores, participating in recreational activities, maintaining our emotional control, navigating social situations, and building relationships. Coaches like me refer to the executive function as the brain's management system because our brain uses these functions to manage our actions and our experiences moment by moment throughout the day. So here's a graph of the level of executive functioning over the lifespan of a neurotypical brain. The executive functions are not fully developed in early childhood, but when we're born, we do have the capacity to learn them. And there is a fast acquisition of these skills between the ages of 3 and 5. And then it sort of continues through adolescence and a little bit beyond. The development of these executive functions is usually complete by our late 20s. I think by last count, we think it's around 27, 28. Now, here's what I want you to hear. These functions are among the slowest developing aspects of the brain, not the ADHD brain, the human brain. Now, ADHD creates about a 25 to 30% delay in the development of a person's executive functions. This creates a performance gap between those with ADHD and those developing in a neurotypical way. And this is why a lot of parents will say, the child just acts so immature for their age, because it's true. Now, the goal for treatment and management of ADHD is to reduce that gap as much as possible before that child leaves home. So we do talk a lot about that prefrontal cortex because that's where the executive functions originate. But what we know now is that these functions don't just involve one part of the brain. These functions rely on the coordination of those networks using those neurotransmitters to pass that information throughout the brain. So let me tell you about a couple of networks that are related to ADHD. The first one is the default mode network. This is what the brain activity looks like when we're just thinking, chilling out, daydreaming. There's hardly any energy at all in there. And then here's what the task positive network looks like. This is what the brain looks like when we're actively involved in problem solving and completing a task. Look at how all of those areas are lighting up and working with each other. So when a person without ADHD goes to perform a task, that thinking network turns off and the doing network turns on. And when they finish the task, the doing network turns off and the thinking network turns on. However, in the ADHD brain, this switch is a little glitchy. And sometimes it'll switch over cleanly and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes that default mode network just fails to turn off. And this is why it's hard for your child to start and complete tasks, to pay attention, to control their little bodies, and control their emotions. So let's take a look at why this switch is faulty. Intensive studies on the brain have shown us that there are indeed chemical and structural differences in the brain between those with ADHD type symptoms and those who don't have them. So let's start with the neurochemical differences. Dopamine helps us tune in to what is important, and having lower levels of dopamine makes it hard for us to pick out and pay attention to what's more important in the moment. Do I listen to my friend talking to me, or do I listen to the teacher? And since dopamine is responsible for passing this information about importance to the prefrontal areas, having lower levels of dopamine make it harder to use the executive functions to adjust my behavior and listen only to the teacher. Dopamine is also that neurotransmitter that governs the reward network in my brain. So people with lower levels of dopamine don't experience motivation in the same way as a neurotypical person. The person with ADHD is more likely to feel rewarded by interacting with their friend than they are by listening to a teacher. So I do want to say this, that there is growing evidence that people with ADHD do have sufficiently high levels of dopamine, but that dopamine is removed from that synaptic gap before it can transfer its information. And so we can also say that the inefficient use of the dopamine also results in the same difficulty tuning into what's important, and it also results in an altered reward pathway. Norepinephrine is that neurotransmitter that's responsible for keeping us alert so we're ready and able to take in that information. Low and efficient levels of norepinephrine make it hard to sustain our attention. And then lower serotonin levels negatively impact a person's ability to get restful and recuperative sleep and to regulate our mood. These lower levels of serotonin are believed to contribute to the high occurrence of anxiety and depression as coexisting conditions with ADHD. So, image studies show the brains of those with ADHD also tend to be smaller than those of their non affected peers. The brain is developing in a structurally typical fashion, just slower. And again, while a lot of focus is placed on that prefrontal cortex, areas like the cerebellum and the emotional regulation center, those parts are labeled here in green, those are also smaller. Now, this decreased structural volume and decreased efficiency of those neurotransmitters, as before, result in irregular activity in the areas that control our behavior and our emotions. Now, in fact, these brain studies indicate, again, that default mode network, that resting brain, doesn't fully turn off when we go to do a task. And that's what is affecting our task initiation, our persistence to complete the task, and our sustained attention throughout the task. So if we have somebody who's making careless mistakes, it's this default mode network that's just not turning off. Those with ADHD also have a higher activity in the area of selective visual attention. This is experienced by being highly distractible by visual clues. And many of the coaching interventions that I teach leverage this selective visual attention. Now, the treatment to help you reduce that gap, recommended by the American Academy of Pediatrics and every other major health organization, is a combination of symptom and behavior management. For children 5 and under, parent training is recommended as the first line treatment. Medication can be used in extreme cases where perhaps the child's impulsive behavior is presenting a danger to themselves or to others. Symptom management for this age is generally done through good self-care regimens, and I'll talk about those in just a minute. For children 11 and under, the use of parent training in tandem with medication has shown to provide the best management outcomes long term. This doesn't mandate the use of medication, but it does emphasize the need to make sure that you're sufficiently managing the intensity of the symptoms. And we do that to avoid impacting the child's quality of life. For children 12 and over, the use of medication and behavioral interventions like life skills coaching has been shown to give the best outcomes. However, we are finding out that if we offer parent training all the way up to 18, the life skills coaching engagements tend to go easier and they tend to be shorter because it provides the benefit of the parents, the people controlling the environment in which that child is living. It helps them understand the why behind some of these interventions that we're trying to get the kid to try. So when people think of ADHD symptom management, a lot of the times they just go straight to stimulant medication. But there's actually 4 levels of symptom management. There is the stimulants like Focalin or Vyvanse. These work to stimulate the production of those neurotransmitters and to keep them in that gap longer so they can transfer their information. There are non-stimulants like Strattera, if you've heard of that. These accomplish the same thing, but they work by different mechanisms. And if you've ever taken guanfacine or Intuniv, we usually put it in this non-stimulant group, but these work by even a different mechanism than things like Strattera. Then there's vitamins and supplements like fish oils, minerals, calcium, zinc. Now, I want to stop off here and make sure you guys understand. This is not like reading on Facebook, hey, I heard fish oil is good for ADHD, and then going down to the grocery store or the pharmacy and buying some fish oil. These vitamins and supplements should still be prescribed under the care of a doctor. They should know what you're giving. Most of the fish oils that are available in pharmacies and in the grocery stores are not in the right ratio of the different kinds of fish oil to provide any kind of help for ADHD. They're just for general brain health. And when it comes to these minerals like calcium, magnesium, and zinc, it's very easy to get too much of these. And so you want to get the right dosage from a doctor. You want them to know, hey, yes, you need to be taking zinc. You need to be taking calcium, and this is how much. All right, so I want to make sure that people don't just think that this is just run down and get a multivitamin. That's not what that level is. And then there is self-care. This includes getting enough sleep, exercise, a good diet that focuses on protein, because protein is the building block for dopamine. And it also includes effective stress management. Now, no matter which one of these upper levels that you choose, you must always have a good self-care plan. And that's because none of these methods listed above them can overcome sleep deprivation or overcome hunger or overcome excess stress. So it's not uncommon for us to use these options in combination with each other. Parents need to work with their doctor to find the right level of symptom management for their child. First, you need to consider how intense are your child's symptoms? And second, where are these symptoms showing up in your child's life? Said differently, what tasks are they keeping your child from doing consistently or being successful in? And finally, what's the quality of your child's life? How do they feel about things right now? Are they miserable? Are they developing low self-esteem? Do they continue to have the same kind of problem day after day after day? And then, based on your answers, the doctor's going to offer you some recommendations, some options about where to start. The goal of that symptom management is to increase the levels and the efficiencies of the neurotransmitters in order to decrease the intensity of the symptoms. And basically, what we want to do is we want to make a better switch between these two networks. So remember, behavioral management is a part of the treatment prescribed. It's not a luxury add-on. So let's turn to how we select the right level of behavioral management for our child. I think one of the biggest mistakes that parents make is that they think behavioral management is only for disruptive children. And so they delay getting this type of help until there's a catastrophic problem, like failing grades, trouble keeping friends, being kicked out of daycare, right? Low self esteem. This behavioral management addresses every part of their daily life. And even sweet, quiet, compliant children with ADHD need this intervention. Parent training is targeted toward those parents of children 11 and under. But again, I'm going to repeat, a life skills coaching engagement for a child 12 and over goes much easier and much faster when the parents truly understand the interventions the coach is providing. Behavioral management includes getting classroom interventions like 504 accommodations and individual education plans for those with coexisting learning disabilities. Social skills can be taught in coaching, therapy, and at school. But if a child is struggling with a mental health coexisting condition like anxiety, depression, eating disorders, self harm, these need to be treated by a trained mental health care provider, not a coach. Let's take a closer look at the components of the behavioral management. First, remember the parent training and life skills coaching are part of the treatment plan. And when parents ask me, why do I need training if it's my child that's struggling? The short answer is that children cannot learn to manage their ADHD on their own. They have to have a point of need resource there and support, and that's the parents, because most of these skills are learned at home. And while research is telling us that parents know a lot about the symptoms of ADHD, it's also telling us that they tend to be less knowledgeable on how to teach skills to children when those symptoms are present. Now, life coaching includes bringing the person with ADHD, in our case, the child, into the coaching engagement to learn more advanced skills. And where the parent training seeks to establish and build a collaborative relationship between the parent and child, life skills coaching seeks to leverage and expand on that collaborative relationship to go forward and learn these more advanced skills. So we can't afford to think of ADHD as an academic issue or as this nuisance. The more we study ADHD, the more we realize that it's hardly ever a solitary diagnosis. It's often accompanied by other neurodevelopmental disorders. You can read them here, but I do want to highlight that over 50% of people with ADHD have a diagnosable learning disability, and dyslexia tends to be the most common. ADHD often coexists with behavioral disorders, mood disorders, and other disorders as well. And this is why behavioral management component is so important in managing ADHD. So the goal of that behavior management is to create an ADHD friendly environment that is conducive to learning and implementing new processes that accommodate or take those ADHD challenges into account. So again, when we use effective symptom management to decrease the intensity of our ADHD symptoms, we create a situation where the person can now focus well enough to learn strategies for more successful outcomes. So the first why that I often get is, why is it so easy for my child to do things they like and so hard for them to do the things I need them to do? Well, remember, if a human's going to get something done, we have to turn on that task positive network. And when that task positive network turns on, it can start coordinating all of the executive functions to get this task done. So let's look more at the differences between a neurotypical brain and an ADHD brain. Neurotypical brains tend to turn on for things of importance that have a priority or a deadline. And so we tend to call that an importance-based brain. Now, when I work with kids, they can tell me what the priorities are. They know when the deadlines are. They know what the important things are. They know these things, and they're not ambivalent toward them or dismissive of them. But these things are not what turn on that task positive network in their brain. So I already talked about these lower levels of neurotransmitters and the inefficient connections and how they create irregular activity in that ADHD brain. But it turns out that when the task sort of involves or includes this genuine interest, a right kind of challenge, novelty, fun, the right kind of competition, or an internal urgency, not the parent's urgency, the internal to the person with ADHD's urgency, there is an immediate chemical change in that ADHD brain that facilitates that task positive network to turn on. And so we tend to think of the ADHD brain as an interest based brain. Again, let me emphasize people with ADHD do understand and appreciate importance and deadlines. Those are just not the things that jumpstart that chemical reaction in their brain. Why doesn't discipline change my child's behavior? Now, most of the time, this is not really the question. Most of the time, the real question is why doesn't punishment work to change my child's behavior? Or why doesn't my child care if they get punished? Well, a crucial mechanism in motivation and behavioral change is the brain's reward pathway. So, when the neurotypical brain engages in activities associated with positive outcomes or rewards, the ventral tegmental area produces and releases dopamine to other parts of the brain. That dopamine travels to a place called the nucleus accumbens that shares connections with the amygdala, our emotional center. And this translates to feelings of pleasure and reward. Now, the amygdala is tucked way down inside the brain, right behind there. Okay? Now, the nucleus accumbens also shares connections with the hippocampus, and this helps attribute a memory and learning to that reward. And then part of the dopamine travels to the prefrontal cortex, where it connects these feelings of reward to the behavior, and it creates this conscious experience of the reward. This works to motivate and teach a person to repeat these behaviors that led to that positive outcome. Now remember, ADHD is associated with lower levels of dopamine and a less efficient use of dopamine that's present, meaning that the ADHD brain does not have enough dopamine to carry these messages about motivation to other parts of the brain, and the pathways that would carry those messages are not working well. Now, this lower level of dopamine and reduced efficiency result in a disruption to that reward pathway in the ADHD brain. And the ultimate effect is that this changes how a person with ADHD perceives reward and pleasure. What the person with ADHD experiences is a lower level of enthusiasm for starting and completing tasks. All right, Mary, I think we asked you about punishment. Why are you telling us about reward? Let me get to that point right now. Punishment releases a stress hormone called cortisol into the brain. Cortisol disrupts the communication between that hippocampus and the prefrontal cortex. So the brain cannot create this association between the action and the punishment, the result. In other words, no learning occurs here when that cortisol is present. And research tells us that the overuse of punishment further suppresses this reward pathway. So if you're sitting there and you're saying, hey man, Mary, I tried that positive parenting stuff and that positive reinforcement mess, and it didn't work. Well, it might be that you didn't remove the punishment and the cortisol and give that reward circuit time to reestablish itself. Mary, why do I feel like such an overwhelmed and bad parent? Well, first of all, if you're here trying to learn more about your child and ADHD, I am not going to let you call yourself a bad parent. I will acknowledge that you feel overwhelmed, and that's because you're trying to build a house with a stapler and a hole punch. ADHD wasn't even classified as a developmental disorder until 2013. All of the interventions up to that point for behavior were based on the thinking that these people know what to do, they know how to do it, they're choosing not to do it. This is what we call the behavioral paradigm. This is how your parents were raised, this is how they raised you. It's the only model you have ever seen in action, and it has become ingrained in how you parent your own child. Now, to help you understand this behavioral paradigm, think about this and think about yourself in this situation. When you were young, your parents came and told you, clean up your room, and it didn't happen. How did your parents react? Did they punish you? Did they threaten to punish you? Did they yell at you? Did they shame you? Did they accuse you of being disobedient or defiant? If you answered yes to any of those questions, you were raised under the behavioral paradigm, where the only reason to not comply with a request was rooted in some sort of motivational issue in a moral sense. Now think of yourself as a parent. If you react in any of the same ways to your own kids when they don't complete a task, you're parenting in that same behavioral paradigm. Don't be mad at your parents. The world did not know any better back then. And don't be mad at yourself. Make a plan for learning how to raise a neurodivergent child in today's world. Now, let's talk also about the elephant in the room. ADHD and other causes of executive function deficits are highly heritable conditions. So, when I'm working with a family, I have to remember there's a 60 to 90% chance at least one of those biological parents has ADHD, diagnosed or not. This means as a parent, you have to be aware of your own executive functioning levels. Put your oxygen mask on first before helping your child. It's also very common for parents to seek answers from sources that only give broad sweeping suggestions, and their own organization and processing challenges are preventing them from being able to take that information and translate it into their specific situation. I want you to think about finding someone that can help you find solutions for your unique situation. And finally, parents often have a history of struggling with their own challenges, and they carry a fear that their child is going to experience the same failures, and this begins to inform their parenting style. Again, making sure you're taking the time to heal and take care of yourself is so important. I want to leave you with these thoughts. You cannot learn to parent a child with ADHD through posts on social media. You can't ask a post a question. It's going to be so broad and general that you'll never be able to apply it to your unique situation. Learning what to do is not enough. You have to learn the physical and the biological and the neurological chemistry behind why it works. You have to move away from some of those tightly held beliefs, conscious or subconscious, to get an effective solution. And this learning takes allowing yourself to be a little bit vulnerable and to say, hey, I need help to make things better for my child, myself, and my family. And so here are some resources that you can go out and find. Of course, there's my program, Chaos Free Family, but CHAD, that's Children and Adults with ADHD, has great programs. And you can find great coaches out on ACO or the ADHD Coaches Organization. If you want to look me up, you can follow me. I'm starting to do a lot on social media. But I would look under Chaos Free Family, not Chaos Free ADHD. Again, let me thank you for attending and signing up. I appreciate meeting so many of you. And you guys take care.